Yeah. I remember, that just reminds me of the Super Bowl this last year and Rihanna. And it was like a huge thing that was kind of going on that was like people were like, do not shame Rihanna. Maybe she is pregnant, maybe she isn't. Should you make this comment? Should you not? It was definitely at the epicenter of a pretty crazy conversation that people were having. It ended up that she was pregnant. But the question I think is still there of like, there's this immense pressure that was had nothing to do with Rihanna killing it and being a great singer, and everything to do with how she showed up in her, in what she was wearing and how she looked in what she was wearing. When I'm pretty sure the year before, I think that was the Rockefellers that would like, all the rappers. They weren't in great shape. Like, let's be honest. Like, it wasn't like they showed up in six packs and were like looking great. But no one talked about that, did we? We just talked about how great of a performance it was.
Yes, yes. And I mean, I'm since we're talking Super Bowl, what was it, the Shakira and J Lo combination? And but think about how much focus was on their bodies and how great they looked for their age.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so much attention and conversation. And this is just true in our media. When I open up my Facebook, I have so many ads that are served up to me on how I can look younger and better for 50, and it's just something that we internalize, of course, and then
Mm-hmm.
it follows us into all areas of our lives, including the workplace.
That's such a good point. I think most people, and this is something that I think was hard for me to come to terms with, which was to understand some of the biases that I have against that exist in society against Black people. I also internalize. Like, I see the same media, I see the same news that all the criminals are always Black people, or the phrasing is always like there was an actor who recently died, and I'm gonna forget his name, which I feel horrible about, but he was a Black actor. He died, and they said, in his title in the New York Times, they were like, you know, I think it was like addict saved, who had a career is great, died unfortunately. And there was someone else who was like a white actor who also had a troubled past, let's say, and it was said beloved actor dies unexpectedly at 56. Like, they didn't add all these extra terms to it, and I think those are the type of things that you don't realize we take note of, right, and we internalize as well. We have to do work on. So I think that's such a great point.
Yeah, and for those who haven't taken the Harvard implicit bias assessment, I took it, and I expected, we all think we don't have that much bias,
Yeah.
but it turns out the area I was the most biased against, the population or demographic, was older people, more so than anything else. And I was shocked because,
Yeah.
I'm not yet, elderly, but, I'm a older, middle-aged woman, and I have a lot of bias towards myself.
Yeah. And I think it's such a good point too that you took it. Like, I think what I really want listeners to take away from this, which is what Rachel just said, is like being aware of it is actually better than just making the assumption I don't have any biases. Like, having those things and being aware of it, instead of, I think a lot of people are intimidated about it, or just make the assumption that, oh, I don't have any bias. Why would I need to take that test? Like, okay, take it and prove yourself right. At least then you know that you don't have any biases. But I think it's such an excellent point. But okay, so now we talked very theoretical. How do we then take this into organizations when we talk about them building diverse cultures, maybe even talent acquisitions, right? We know these biases exist out there. What can companies do in a very practical sense to try to remove bias from their selection or address bias potentially in their hiring managers?
So I want to kind of take a step back, and
Okay.
I think when we talk about DE&I in a lot of organizations that I've been a part of, a lot of the onus for
Hmm.
bringing in diverse, talent into an organization is with recruiting,
Hmm.
and of course, we have a huge role to play in that. But if the infrastructure isn't there, if the buy-in from the leaders that, hey, this is going to be an investment either in resources and money and time to be able to get diversity into our organization and retain that diversity, if that's not there, what recruiting is doing is going to be very performative, and the candidates are going to sniff that out, the employees are going to sniff that out, and your strategy is going to fail. And I'll give an example. At a company that I worked at, we actually had a head of diversity. We talked a ton about recruiting for diversity. We had KPIs or goals around how we were going to recruit for this diversity. And yet, when we had a company all hands, 95% of the presenters were white men. Most of the executive leadership was white men. So there's a lot of hypocrisy there. And it's very hard to hold on to your diverse talent or to recruit in new diversity when you're not acting on the values that you say you have.
Mhm.
So I don't know, that didn't really quite answer your question, but I wanted to kind
No,
of.
no, I love this topic more than what I was saying. I don't know
Okay.
what he was saying, but I don't like the guy who said what I said before. He's
Okay.
stupid. I like this. I think this is actually such an important topic and something that is always missed, which is just to reiterate, companies oftentimes rely so heavily on recruitment that they miss the fact that people aren't staying. Like I see this all the time. I'm sure you do as well when you work with companies. That what happens is their recruiters are actually doing a fantastic job of bringing candidates in, but they're not staying. Usually, we look at promotions. No women or people of color, the groups are bringing are getting promoted. Period. Oftentimes, it's a particular department that's making all these hires, but they're also making all these hires because they also have a very high turnover rate, which means we just have a revolving door. So what's going on with that leader? I think you're incredibly correct. And I can't agree with you enough that it's not just a recruitment. And oftentimes because it's easy, because we can understand the numbers and it feels like we're making progress there. There's a hesitation to focus almost too much on it and forget that like we really have to do the work. There is no easy way around it. You got to do the work. You got to engage. You got to work on retention. You got to work on representation.
You have to have the buy-in from the most senior leaders, the people who are managing the budget, who are
Yep.
managing the strategy, because you can't just turn a light switch on when it comes to recruiting. You can't just say, all right, we need some more Black engineers. But you have the same amount of time to do this and the same resources. It's not going to be effective. You need to live your values and put your money where your mouth is. So hiring for diversity, it requires an investment of funds. So whether that is, investing in communities, internship programs, mentorship programs, the branding that you need to amplify, assuming you have a inclusive culture, amplify that messaging through, recruitment marketing activities. And then it takes time. A lot of time when you start a search, the most obvious candidates are going to be your white men, right? If you're looking for engineers, they're going to be your white men. And if you're in a time crunch, recruiters are going to put those candidates in first, and you're going to hire that white engineer. And so if you are committed to hiring for diversity, you have to invest the time and the money and the resources in that, and that comes from the top. Recruiting can't own that.
And I think what I love about that is the flip side of that is if you don't, you can't be surprised that it doesn't work. Because I always think about, I think it's Apollo 11, and they asked one of the engineers, one of the senior engineers in NASA after Apollo 11, which I think is the one that exploded. I can't remember. I think that was it. But that's what I'm talking about. They talked to him about the ship that exploded, and they asked him, why did this happen? Why did this happen? And he basically said, well, one of the biggest reasons is they only started taking people from the same universities that had the same teachers that thought the same thing. And before, when they had people from all over, from all different universities, they would question each other. But instead, when they started all going this profession, they just agreed that's actually the correct formula and that's the right math for that, instead of questioning each other. And I think you can't be surprised when something doesn't take off, because it's a natural human thing that we want to hire from our network, from the people we know. And the people we know tend to look like us and have similar experiences. It's why we get along with them. It's why we're like, yeah, let's go hang out and do something. Like, you like snowboarding, I like snowboarding. You like golfing, I like golfing, and then it works out. So we have to be very intentional when we have a business, because we want that thought process to come from many perspectives, so we're not missing anything. So I love that. I think that's such an excellent point.
Well, and that there and lies the issue with referral programs, which can be a great source of hires for companies. So there is a time and place for that, but you have to be really intentional. I've been in situations where we had sort of like this gold mine where, somebody worked at a company that was going through a lot of change and they were able to recruit all their buddies into this one team. And so then we have a team that has all very similar work experiences and perspectives. And then, same thing for sort of that networking. A lot of times I've been in organizations, the internships go to the CEO's
Yeah.
neighbor's nephew, right? And they all, live in that gated community or they are on that golf course. It's a lot of privilege in that type of networking. And when you rely too heavily on that, don't be surprised when you have a lot of people that look the same.